Agreed on that I'd take a first write, he'd do rewrites, he'd send it back, and then we'd get on the phone and discuss. So we'd done that process. We got together on the phone on a Saturday night, 7 o'clock, and I'd sent the chapter over to him, and he sent it back to me, and so we began the conversation. I said, "So, Carrie, did you get the chapter?" He said, "Yes." I said, "What'd you think?" He said, "You ruined it." I said, "I didn't ruin it, I fixed it." He said, "You didn't fix it." He said, "It's all disjointed now. It goes from A to E to F." I said, "It's not disjointed." I said, "It's meaningful now." Now, how long did that conversation take? Did anybody time it? This is about 8 seconds, yeah. And all that happened that quickly. Now, the irony is, the chapter we were working on was called Master My Stories, from a book called Crucial Conversations, of all things. So we were action learning our way through this, realizing these moments mattered a lot. The big idea that started to emerge from our work is that you can measure the health of a relationship, the health of a team, even the health of an entire organization by measuring the average lag time between identifying and discussing problems. That's what began to emerge from our research. And we began looking at ourselves from that same perspective. What about our relationships? What about our marriages? What about our families, our organization? What's the average lag time between identifying a problem, feeling it, and it getting on the table in a healthy way? To put it graphically, it looks kind of like this. So we all kind of walk along through life, and we all have our white Volkswagen van moment when we have this super awesome goal that we decide to go after. So we start marching happily towards it. Inevitably, on that march, we encounter these moments. Why? Because there's something by definition of high stakes on the table. The instant you have a super awesome goal, by definition, there will be moments where the stakes are high, where people disagree, and then it becomes an emotional, visceral process. Ladies and gentlemen, what we've learned is that the best way to minimize the number of crucial conversations you have in life is to have a meaningless life. As soon as you go after something important, they will occur. Now, you're familiar with this important research. Any of you seen this before? Well, let's enjoy the moment for a second. I want to give you a backstory for it as well. So as we were doing our research, my son Samuel had a science fair project due, and he said he wanted to study how little kids deal with crucial conversations. I was not particularly encouraging. I said, "Samuel, I think little kids don't have the same kind of social constraints that adults do." And yet, look what he found.
We all know adults stink at talking about tough things, but how about little kids? Here's my experiment. Feed kids wretched brownies, then see if they'll tell you the truth, especially when they think it might hurt your feelings. First, I made the brownies. Lots of chocolate, eggs and flour, but instead of sugar, I put in salt. Lots of salt. There's no way they could like these better. Now I recruit kids of various ages for a taste test. I tell them I want to compare ordinary brownies to my special brownies. My dear grandmother's special recipe. My dear dead grandmother's special recipe. Then I give them $1 for being such a big help. My parents always taught me that if you want someone to like you, give them money. Okay, here goes. First, they ate the yummy sugar brownies. Next, they eat the salt bricks. Watch this girl. She can hardly keep from gagging. And now for the crucial moment. Will they tell me the truth and possibly offend me? I asked them to point to the brownies they like best. No surprise that some tried to spare my feelings. But watch, even the one who gagged? And how about really little kids? But do you want to know what they really thought? Here guys, I have leftovers. Does anybody want seconds?
Isn't that astounding? I was just absolutely blown away. Now, the backstory is that little girl whose face puckered up, her name is Hannah. She lives right next door to us, and she is one of the most blunt, honest, outspoken little kids in the world. But she's lying about the brownies. It blew my mind to see how one after another these kids, who with absolutely no other agenda, were coming in and lying about how they really felt. So what staggered me in that moment, and the words that sort of came to me, was at what a remarkably young age you and I start to draw a damnable conclusion. It turns out that at about age 3 or 4, you and I start to believe that you frequently have to choose between telling the truth and keeping a friend. And that one belief causes mischief for the rest of our lives. That's the controlling assumption that dictates how we show up in interpersonal situations from that moment forward. And that's why these moments of disproportionate influence have such an enormous effect. David Chase and I did a research project a few months back. We asked people across the world, if you had a magic wand that would eliminate consequences for just one conversation. So you have a permission now to say one thing, anything you want to anybody you want, and there will be no consequences. Who would you say it to, and what would it be? I want you to look at some of the responses and speculate for a moment with me about the consequences of these moments of disproportionate influence. So here was one. To my boss, for 8 years you single-handedly drove away every good employee we've ever had. I can no longer tolerate your condescending tone, your passive micromanaging, your overt verbal sexual harassment towards female employees, your hypocritical management or work time, or even your insincere compliments. Affectionately, moi. Now, here's what I want you to think about. What is the cost or consequence of keeping that in a vault? And how is it showing up today? That's what we began to notice. Second, to my wife. We've been together a long time, but it's time for us to consider going our separate ways. Ladies and gentlemen, so many broken relationships are not broken because it was inevitable. They were broken by silence. They were broken because the lag time between feeling a problem and discussing the problem in a healthy way yawned so wide that the relationship broke. To my supervisor, Now let me ask you the question, what does silence look like in that case? Is silence truly silent, or is it showing up? To my colleague, I betrayed your trust by sharing confidential information that you shared with me with another peer. I apologize. I'd change it if I could. How does guilt show up when it's undiscussed? To the woman next to me, do you have a cat or something that marks your coat, shoes, or bags? There's a really bad odor from you in your desk. It's very nauseating and offensive to me. Now that's a sensitive issue to put on the table, but let's ask ourselves, what is the cost of silence and how is it showing up? The principle that we found over time, the reason these moments have such disproportionate influence is because you and I don't get to vote on how they affect relationships. If you don't talk it out, what do? You act it out. We know that. It shows up in 100 different ways. You sleep on the couch at night and you imagine someone suffering upstairs. If it's not getting discussed, it's getting acted out. It shows up in your behavior like this. Whenever I get mad at you, you never seem to get upset. How do you manage to control your temper? I just go and clean the toilet, she says. Well, how does that help? I use your toothbrush. To my husband, I feel frustrated by the mess and clutter in our house. I love you, but I can't stand this anymore. I've been patient for a long time. It appears you don't care. In addition, I think you need professional help to deal with hoarding tendencies. I want to get some counseling, and I think you should too. Now I ask us to contemplate for a moment. Is silence truly silent? Or is it showing up somewhere? Finally, what if you were the boss and you're carrying this in your vault? Find a different job now. While I can't prove it, I know that you stir up trouble between your coworkers, you don't pay attention to your job, you lack respect for anyone, you take no responsibility for actions, and blame others. What you and I are trying to do in teaching crucial conversations, at least at the very basic level, is simply this. One simple concept that can dramatically change how people show up in crucial moments is just to read the title of the book. Because it causes us to do this, to start for once calculating the costs of silence, for once realizing silence